You're listening to the People's Podcast. This is JSC Radio.
Always say I try to find compelling people to talk to because the C in JSC Radio stands for conversations. And I couldn't imagine having a better conversation about what we talked about in the first segment, my love of not just video games and of gaming, but also that people need to stop sleeping on how important it is to business. And no better person to have in here than one of the foremost, not just I consider experts, but just someone who really enjoys what we do as gamers. I welcome Erin Simon on to JSC Radio. Welcome to the People's Podcast, and thank you so much for taking time to talk to me here.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to kind of get into this conversation.
So before I go further into this, I want to know a little more about you. Like, where did you grow up? What got you into gaming? What inspired you to kind of get into video games? What started you there? What sent you down this path?
Okay, so what kind of got me through this whole path of like gaming world is I've always been an avid gamer. I remember my brother's first console when I was alive was Sega Genesis, and he played Sonic the Hedgehog a lot on that, and I was kind of like, in a sense, mesmerized. I was like, wow, what is this? It's so colorful. There's rings, there's so much noise and everything. And then from there, I've been pretty much playing video games since then. You know, my family has always been very big on technology, and they really do like video games, stuff like that. So that was something that, like, my parents embrace a lot. And also, you know, as long as they essentially said, as long as you got good grades and everything like that, like, you can play as much video games as you want. And so I pretty much owned every single console growing up, and I remember the days of like Game Boys, the original Xbox, the original PlayStation, you know, even before, we used to have an arcade game in our basement. And so in terms of that side of things, you know, video games have always been a part of my life. And then when it comes to media work, you know, I currently work at Cheddar eSports, but I've been working in media since I was 16, so about 10, 11 years. And
wow.
I've covered everything from traditional sports to music media. And then I would say last year I started covering a lot more of the eSports scene. I watched it a bit, but really last year I jumped more into it. And so now we're here at Cheddar eSports, where, you know, my main focus of coverage is more the traditional eSports teams and leagues and stuff like that. And I basically, that's my main focus in terms of expertise or just knowledge and information when it comes to our show. But the only thing about Cheddar eSports is it kind of forces you to gain knowledge in so many different sectors of eSports, whether it's the business side, whether it is adjustments and rules and regulations and teams and stuff like that. So over time, I've gotten to really understand and learn a lot more about the other aspects of the eSports scene too.
So you mentioned you covered traditional sports. What sports did you cover beforehand?
Honestly, I've had to cover a lot of different sports. When I was doing some freelance work and internship for the Wall Street Journal's sports department, literally I had to basically cover whatever they wanted me to cover. I mean, of course, they allowed me, they had me focusing on sports that I already had knowledge about, and I actually enjoyed football, basketball, even soccer. I remember back then it was the World Cup, so I got to do a piece on the women's national team. And but then also I went to the University of Kentucky, so I covered a lot of our sports, and I helped and assisted with our athletic department when I was there as well. So, but you know, I've also had to do some coverage on unique angles of sports. When it comes to social media, finding out one of the most liked football players on Facebook at that time was Michael Vick, which is kind of crazy because it was close to the time where the dog abuse situation was happening.
It was about 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and it was still that stigma was still on him around that time. So it's crazy that, even though that was the case, he was still the most liked and I assume followed NFL player on Facebook. So these are the different kind of angles and perspectives. And I've always enjoyed telling unique stories. And I think one of the things was, with my experience with covering media is honestly covering traditional sports and even music didn't I would say it didn't challenge me as much as when I had to cover a a crime story, and I had to do that for a local newspaper in Lexington, Kentucky, and I also had to cover a story about suicide in Kentucky. And I felt like just having all these diverse backgrounds in media, whether it was from a journalistic standpoint, as like a print and digital journalist, as a producer, social media, etc., all of it kind of, in a very weird, interesting way, it prepared me for the career that I have now in esports and gaming, because it includes all of that. And it's kind of awesome how there's this similarity between traditional sports and esports that I'm finding, and I'm able to kind of be someone who's kind of like an in-betweener, in the sense that like I can have conversations with esports people, but then I'm also able to effectively translate certain key things about the esports gaming scene to traditional sports people who may not quite understand it. And it's so crucial, especially with this time, because we're seeing a lot of execs and people from like the NFL and et cetera that are actually transitioning over. I think there's a I forget her name, but there's this woman, she was part of the business development for the NFL for like 10 plus years. Now she's part of the Call of Duty league, the new league. So it's cool that we're starting to see that. And I'm actually really excited just to see the relationship of traditional sports and esports growing closer, because it's actually closer than people assume or even think.
It's pretty wild how that is. I remember sitting in a newsroom about 2 years ago when because I'm still based out of Philadelphia. I was working at a different station in Philly at the time, and the story of Josh Harris, the owner of the 76ers, is getting into esports, and I know that they were planning on building an esports arena out in Atlantic City, and the NBA was already getting into it to begin with. And all I heard from a lot of these grizzled old veteran journalists, a lot of the guys who had covered sports at one time, where they were mocking them. And this is 2017. They're still openly mocking them, saying, "Oh, they're just a bunch of lazy kids. Or they're just sitting. People are really going to go and pay money to watch someone play video games." And I looked across the room and I just said to them, "You guys don't have a damn clue, do you, how big this is?" I always said that esports was one of the things, if it were like a stock, I wish I had bought in early, because I could tell even from the very beginning that this was going to be something massive, maybe 8-10 years ago. And even down to seeing it how it is with guys on YouTube, where we laugh about this sometimes. It's like, you actually sit and watch people play video games on YouTube? Absolutely I will, because it's entertaining. It is. And whether it's something like the Game Grumps or like Dashy, I know JD Witherspoon does his thing, or it's the full-on, really hyper-competitive gaming leagues, there's so much money to be made in this. And it really is not just as a form of entertainment, but it's another avenue for people to be able to really do something and turn it into the career. Because we just had the Fortnite championship, and people are astonished that these teenagers are winning millions of dollars doing this, and suddenly it's not a laughing matter anymore. People aren't cracking jokes anymore, saying, "Oh, they're just a bunch of loser kids playing video games." No, this is huge. It's massively huge.
Yeah, it is. And I think that there's this disconnect, because like when people think about gaming, right, a lot of times they think about how they think of it based on their personal experience. So a lot of them didn't play gaming or play video games competitively, so they're thinking that it's more so that. But there are strategies and adjustments when it comes to certain games. Like we even talked to some of the Fortnite World Cup competitors, and even just how they adjusted and how they had to adjust to patch updates or new metas, new heroes, which we are playable characters like in Overwatch. Like Overwatch League just now developed a 2-2-2 format, which they didn't have that before. They had I believe it's a 3-3. And then also, like, for example, we're starting to see a lot more leagues and organizations that are actually becoming more city-based franchise. So, like, the Overwatch League is now doing home stands, which is, like, getting close to home and away. And they have city-based teams and franchises. Now the Call of Duty Pro League is starting to do that as well. And I'm sure we'll see other ones, like the NBA 2K League is expanding that. And so there is a market. And these, like, and I always tell people who kind of mock this scene is go to a big tournament. Like, go to the big tournament, actually see it in person, actually see how engaged these viewers are. Go and maybe, if you can, go and see the training regimen for these pro gamers, right? They take this very seriously, and it's like, you know, and it takes a lot of skill for them to be the top. Not every every competitor within the scene is winning millions and millions of dollars, it's the top one. The same way that a lot of those same media people that are making jokes about esports are the same people who can't even play basketball themselves. So, that's what blows my mind sometimes. It's like you see some of these media people and they want to talk about this and that, but it's like, I could say the same thing for you. I could say you've never played a top sport in your life, or you've never played basketball. Why are you covering basketball then? So
there you go.
Like, if I could say that to them and judge them for the fact that you're covering a sport that you yourself have no top level experience with, but yet you feel the need to give your own opinion on it, like if you can do something in this space, why can't a kid be professional and actually train and have a regimen for gaming? It's like if you see irrationality in them being top gamers, then there's an irrationality in the fact that you've never played basketball or football in your life, but yet you're covering it and you're giving your opinion on it, but you never played it past peewee level. So, it's crazy.
It's wild. What is it like being a woman of color in this space?
Being a woman of color in this space, obviously there's pros and cons, just the same way there are in traditional sports, right? And as someone like myself whose face is a lot more out there, especially because I'm doing media work, of course I'm more susceptible to the toxic side of some communities when it comes to the N-word and people being ridiculous and all that stuff, right? But I think that, it's going to take someone like myself, and there's going to take more women of color, women, Latin, Latinas, and etc. To put ourselves out there, because then it representation matters, and representation, diversity, and inclusion are still important conversations that we're having in esports and gaming. Like, there was a recent news of a young deaf girl who made who got selected as part of FaZe Clan. Now she's a member of FaZe Clan, which is really big because FaZe Clan was male dominated. Now they have a young lady on it, but now it's like, okay, we're still in this phase where like that, or Chiquita Evans being the first women gamer, and all of them deserve these accolades. But it's like, I also kind of want to get to a point where a woman joining a pro team is not like a headline story. It's like a common thing,
It's like how you hear of a black guy getting a coaching job, where we want to get to the point where it's like the NBA, where it's not a big deal that you have a black coach on your team, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and so like that's like something I would like to see change, is like not change in the sense of like they don't deserve the headlines. They do deserve the headlines, but I definitely want this to be something that's more of a common thing, and that's why, for myself, being a woman of color and putting myself out there and talking about gaming is so important, because representation is very important. Despite what some people think, it is super important. There's so many kids can look at this and be like, wow. I've had I've spoken to so one of my professors from college, Professor Buck Ryan. He had me talk to his class, and like some of them were like, they didn't even know they can have a career in this space. But the fact that they have seen me, and he's shown some of the shows that I've worked on, it allows people who love video games and esports, who may not be pro gamers, realize that there are other career paths that you can have in this space. And also, there are people just like themselves in this space as well. So it's been a good experience. Like I said, obviously I've dealt with like the N-word and some crazy stuff, but overall I've had a lot of support. I've had a lot of people who appreciate what I bring to this community and are happy that, I'm serious about the stories that we tell in the interviews and stuff like that. And I really try to convey the messages from the esports community and the gaming community back to the traditional sports and traditional media outlets, and do it in a way where, a lot of people are trying to jump in this space because they see the dollar signs, but it's just like, you got to come in with the right intentions and understand and treat this like not every esports competition is the same way that, baseball and football are sports, but they have different set of rules. They have different amount of players per team and stuff like that, right?
Oh yeah.
And even like, even with salary caps. So, say to the esports leagues, it's under esports, but Overwatch League is run different than how the Fortnite World Cup is. So, just little things. But I do love the fact that, like, I do have like professional athletes and artists and stuff like that are now reaching out to me because they want to figure out how to get into this space, or how to how to showcase their passion for gaming in a way that it doesn't like turn off the community or turn off their current fans. So by naturally doing this, I'm kind of becoming a liaison and kind of being like a middle person. So I'm happy, and I'm really excited for what's in store, especially for Cheddar eSports. We have so much going on, and I love how they support me as not only a gamer and media person, but also as a Black woman. They're very supportive here, so it's been great.
So I guess let me get a little background on you now. And now, where are you originally from? Because clearly you came up in a family, as you've laid out there, that is very open to you being a gamer. Because I know some communities of color, or even different generations, where I'm a little bit older than you, and I remember the idea of a kid playing video games all day was just frowned upon, laughed at. I have this funny story from when I think I was 9 years old. They used to have the old Nintendo World Championships, and they were coming to Detroit. This is about 1990. No, I was actually 11 years old. They were coming to Detroit, and I wanted to go. And I still remember my mother just almost mocking me, saying, "Why would you want to go to a place to watch people play video games?" And this is in 1990, and I was just heartbroken, devastated by this. But it's like some people are now. It's a lot more open. You're a little bit younger than I am, and you came up in a family that was more open to that. So like, what's more of your background? Like, how you grew up, and you were able to play with the different consoles, which makes me super jealous that you were able to get through all of them. I was a Nintendo guy. I didn't do a lot of the Sega stuff until I got into college, but you've had a lot of, it sounds like you've had a lot of really cool experiences. So where did that begin for you?
So I was born in Abington, Pennsylvania. And so, like, my dad's originally from Philadelphia, and then my mom's originally from New York. But my family has always been kind of, like, open to different, like, arts and technology and stuff like that. I mean, we are very much a tech family, but then also, like, we are very much into expressing yourself in arts and stuff like that, because my family is very mixed. So I'm a lot of different things in terms of ethnicities, but I mostly identify with being Black and Puerto Rican. And so, you know, my family has always been different and has always embraced being different. So with that comes embracing different hobbies and interests and stuff like that. It wasn't like anything where like anytime I was into like photography, art, video games, stuff like that, my parents saw it more so of like me becoming more well-rounded, and especially because I once upon a time I grew up in a single household, but now my stepdad has been around in my life for a very long time, and he actually created one of the first video games for the Commodore.
Wow.
And so that's like, just that alone shows like how much my family is so embracive with that side. And my parents always wanted me to be a well-rounded woman, because they felt like in life to open your eyes and ears to things that are out there, and life in general will ultimately bring you more experiences and make you a better person at the end of the day. And so, I was always doing different things. Like, I played video games. I was a top soccer player. I was into photography. I loved painting, and, I loved reading books. And there wasn't really anything that my parents were like, no, because everything that I did and still do is all very much positive, and is all very much focused on me diversifying my experiences, my knowledge, but then also there's important skill sets. I think that's the interesting thing too, right? Because when people think of video games, they're like, oh, it's a waste of time and etc. But funny enough, they're actually starting to use video games to hire people now. They utilize video games for cognitive developments. They're utilizing video games for medical purposes. So video games actually have benefits that you could utilize, and it's funny enough how people on social media now, like, they meet people or they make friends with people on social media, like just on Twitter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But the funny thing is, gamers have been doing that with video games. Ever since we had the capabilities of playing on Xbox Live, we were making friends online before we even met them in person. And that's what people are doing on social media. Like, that was the social setting in gaming. And gaming is still very social based. It just has the online capabilities, but what they don't understand, or maybe what they don't see, is there's also local events and for one of the biggest fighting game tournaments, Evo. A lot of people in the FGC, which is the fighting gaming community, they're all going to Vegas to link up to go to watch this tournament or to compete in this tournament. So, just having that experience, and I know I kind of like went on a little bit of a rant, but like my parents, as you can tell, like I'm very passionate about this, and it's something that I love. Like I love video games as much as I love sports, and as much as I love music. And it's like I'm able to find a path that like I can incorporate all, but I wouldn't have been able to do that if my family wasn't open to me being able to pursue all these passions. But like I said, it stems from the fact that like my family is very mixed, and we were mixing when it was illegal. So we've never been a family where we look down upon anyone's career, anyone's hobbies, any of that. At the end of the day, my mom's side came from Puerto Rico. My dad's side originally from Virginia, moved to Philadelphia, and the one thing is they all said it's just be hardworking, and get your education. That was the most important things for them. Everything else, if you want to do, as long as those aren't affected, cool.
It sounds like your family doesn't want to operate in this monolith. That some communities of color, we can be guilty of that. We will occasionally operate in a monolith, like, oh, well, you're into that. That's something that white people do. I've heard that way too many times about gaming and so many other things. Oh, that's something that was like, no, somebody had to be the first to do something. And occasionally, maybe we just enjoy it. And it's so cool to hear that. You mentioned music. Like, what are you listening to?
Oh, man. Honestly, I listen to all, I was never, of course I grew up around hip-hop. So my uncle's cousin is Scoop from Das EFX. So hip-hop was always played around in my family.
Wait, from Das EFX. One of my favorite groups when I was a teenager, Diggity Das EFX. That's, wow. Okay. That's super cool.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. And growing up, my uncle played a lot of hip hop, my family did, and then my family was always big and into R&B and just so I listen to all sorts of music. I'm the kind of I'm someone who obviously I love hip hop and I love R&B, but then also I'm open to listening to country if it makes sense, and I'm interested in pop. I even listen to classical music sometimes. It helps me concentrate. But I listen to old school acts, obviously Das EFX and then Wu-Tang and a few others. But then also, I'm listening to younger cats like YBN Corday. His project is really solid. I checked out previously the Dreamville project with the entire team. They had a really dope posse cut on there. I listen to R&B, old school R&B and new school. I have a very wide taste in music, but I also sometimes, and honestly, it really depends on my vibes too. Today, I was listening to a lot of Motown, and then yesterday I was listening to what was I listening to? Yesterday I was listening to this producer artist Masego. I was listening to him, and then some days I had NSYNC and Backstreet Boys on. I do this thing before every single show for Cheddar eSports. I'm like, what are you guys feeling today? And I'll play music, and then do something. Usually they're just like, hey, Erin, play whatever you want to play. And I'll always play a different vibe every single day. But they'll love it just because I listen to so much music all the time. There's honestly not a day that I'm not listening to music, honestly. So I love all of it, to be honest.
It sounds like we have that in common. And by the way, being the guy from Detroit, I greatly appreciate the Motown. It's Motown is always in my ear all the time. I grew up in a house where my dad sang. He grew up singing in church, and he was a teenager when Motown and everything was really hitting. And now he got into the old 70s funk music, the disco music. And I was a hip-hop guy growing up, obviously, because hip-hop came into its own late 80s, early 90s. But his thing is he would always hear what I was listening to and say, hey, that sounds like a song that's in my record collection. That sounds like a song in my record collection. And he shows me the record collection, and I'm like, geez, this is more dope than some of the stuff I've been listening to in the rap albums. And I got bigger into the 70s disco, and I have a Spotify playlist that's so many friggin' songs, and it's all over the place. Like it's everywhere. So I obviously respect that, because music does kind of dictate moods. I'll be in a newsroom and my headphones will be on and I'm prepping for shows and they're like, "What are you listening to?" It's like, dude, I don't think you'd really understand. Because some days it's Royce the 5'9", and some days it's the Temptations. It all depends on the mood I'm in. And I can go to a bunch of different places and just kind of be there and be in there. It does that for you. And I think that's one reason why you jumped out to me so much, is because there's such a diverse vibe to you, that there's not one thing you're into. And it speaks to what I think is really cool about this millennial generation. I'm like the oldest possible millennial, but this millennial generation is that there's so much openness to diversity of not just simply race, but diversity of thought, diversity of interest in music, and being more open to certain things, where the Gen Xers and especially the boomers, we weren't always receptive to that. And it's just interesting that when I talk to people like you, it's just like, okay, so at least I knew I wasn't just out on this island by myself. Being this slightly different cat.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think that like having, you're diversifying interests and perspectives honestly make for better conversations moving forward. But it's also hard, and I understand it, because we're in like a period. I would say period of time. I guess you could say time range, but like where having differing opinions or thoughts is kind of like looked upon in a bad way,
Yeah.
And there's plenty of times where I always tell people that most people don't listen to they listen to react. They never listen to understand. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, and especially with social media, with this ability of being rewarded for having outlandish commentary or to respond in an outlandish period of like a moment, it kind of dilutes this ability of having differing thoughts and opinions and feelings, everything like that. And so, I always try. It's not that I always try. Like, I'm always someone who is like very like open with my thoughts. And I always joke around about it, because I'm just like, I'm a Black Puerto Rican woman. Like, you're going to hear my opinions whether you like it or not.
You getting these opinions one way or the other.
Yeah, but I joke about it because I actually do really listen. And even when people have, opposing thoughts or even opposing interests and stuff like that, I'm always interested in learning. And I think that's also just like my journalistic side. I like learning about different things, and I like hearing about different like how people think and how they process and how they view things differently from everyone else. And it's funny enough, because I actually had a conversation with my coworkers not too long ago, and he even was like, "Thank you so much for like the way that you communicate with me," because even though we were talking about just like social disparities and just how like the perception of social issues and things, can stem from the fact of how we were upbringing, what our ethnicity is, because like, he's Jewish and white, and how he viewed things, there were certain things that he didn't even process in his mind because he is Jewish and white. And
exactly.
Like, you can't blame him for that, But then it's just like, I talked to him from my perspective, and then there were some things where he had his thoughts, and I was like, oh no, I agree with you on that. And so, I think it's important for us to continue to open our eyes, mind, and ears, because that's the only way that we're going to make things better, just overall, not just for ourselves, but just overall better in the world and in society and etc. And I think that like if people were more open to allowing kids to pursue like the gaming scene, or just be just, you may not have to understand it, but just be okay with the fact that there are kids that like watching other people play video games. It's like the same way that people like watching people play football.
Exactly.
It can be exciting and entertaining for them. So yeah, I just hope that like, with people listening to this, or people engaging with me, or people just engaging with others, I hope that they aren't afraid to express their different interests and hobbies, because ultimately, like, you never know who's watching, and you may help someone in the end by showcasing and really discussing and highlighting the other hobbies and interests that you might not otherwise have showcased. So it's super important.
I was saying the other day to someone, and I mean this in the best possible way, that this is the first generation of black kids, kids of color. This might be the first generation where kids of color are really allowed to be weird and really embrace things that people always perceived as weird or odd or different. Where now if a kid's into video games, if he's black, he doesn't get the crap that maybe someone like me got in 1987 or 1988, where it's like, how can you be into video games? It's weird. Or even in the early 90s, where now if you're into this sort of thing, there's a place where a kid can go and be seen, and it's like, this is me. These people get me. These people are into me. If you're into the arts, you're into dancing, whatever it is, you're into doing engineering. There's people who are big into just like doing code. All these different things. You don't feel as ostracized anymore because now you feel seen, and it helps to have people like you, where it's like, okay, it is cool to do these things. It is interesting to do these things. You're not just you're not considered a nerd, or being a nerd is actually a good thing now. And I like how you mentioned, by the way, that nuance is a word I love to use a lot, because we have it in social media. We don't have enough nuance in conversations. It's either all or nothing. Someone just makes a blanket statement and that's it. There's not nuance. There's not detail. And we need to have more of that, because people don't listen. They hear a lot of things and they react, as you said, but they don't listen. And that's it's interesting that you say that, because it does make a lot of sense with me. And you said we both see it in social media every single day. Like all the time. It's outrageous.
It is, and it's interesting, because a lot of times I ask people, what is the general consensus to what is normal and what is weird? There's really no generalized, like, this is considered normal. It's all based upon the person's own the person's individual preferences, their thoughts, and their own feelings.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's why, like, I always strive for people to not say, like, oh, that's normal, or oh, that's weird, because those are two, what I like to call, like, extreme adjectives, like, in terms of describing something.
Too far into the spectrum.
It's a very generalized term, and I always believe that generalization is not ever a good thing. And so it's funny, because people are like, oh, it's cool to play video games now. It was weird before. When in my eyes, I'm like, no, it was always cool to play video games. You guys just changed your perspective of it. But a lot of us are the same. And so, and I like how you said that, like, black kids are able to be in this space, like, and to be expressive of ourselves. That's what I like to say, expressive. I don't even like to say weird. It's just we're being more expressive of ourselves and being more of ourselves.
Exactly.
And it applies to, and it's not just even black kids. I think just the youth in general are becoming more comfortable with being themselves. Like, we're seeing more people who are expressing interest in stuff that they may not otherwise. Like, we're seeing the growth of Afropunk, right? We're seeing the growth of kids being open with their sexuality from the LGBTQ plus community. So I think that it's just more so, like, we ourselves are more comfortable with being ourselves, and I think that's, like, the key thing. Like, kids they don't care what you think about eSports or gaming. They just love being a part of it, and they love watching people play video games. And to them, that's a part of who they are. And they're going to do it, whether these older people or just individuals like it or not. And so, sometimes you gotta, sometimes things have to grow, and you have to force people to change their perspective. Like, as for you being a hip hop fan, and me, remember that time when hip hop was looked upon as being a bad, weird thing?
If we ever get to talk at length about other things off air, I got some stories about how hip hop, just being 8-9 years old when rap music first really took off in the mid to late 80s. I got some stories about how people looked at hip hop. It's like the black community, the older black community, the boomer black community looked at hip hop the way that they looked at rock and roll in the 50s and 60s. It's going to ruin society. It's like that sort of thing. It's the same thing. Yeah, that's why I've always been more open to it, because I remember what it was like in 1993, 94, 95, where my dad would dismiss rap as, oh, that's not going to last long, to 10 years later, he's sitting in his backyard listening to my Tupac albums. And yeah, Pop, I put you out there like that. But it's real. That's very real. It's interesting. We'll do a little rapid fire here to close this out. Now, you mentioned you've had all the different consoles. Which one would you go for? The Dreamcast or the GameCube?
That's a good one. Wow, that's a good one. I think I'm going to go. Wow. I think, you know what? I'm going to go with the Dreamcast. I'm going to go with the Dreamcast because the Dreamcast, even though its run was not that long, it had a lot of great video games.
It really did.
For like Crazy Taxi, Jet Set Radio, 2K, like all these different video games, and it was definitely like ahead of its time, and it set a precedent for other consoles moving forward. But I also do believe that even though GameCube was a system that a lot of people bought, especially for Melee, which I love. That's one of my favorite games.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I still, in some capacity, feel like people like the GameCube itself is underrated in some aspects, I feel like. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Dreamcast for this one.
Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat? Which series?
Dang. Okay, so in terms, oh wow, this is super hard.
I came prepared.
Okay, I'm gonna say, well, Street Fighter. I'm gonna go with Street Fighter. Mortal Kombat. I played a lot of Street Fighter before, but I've been actually playing MK11 a lot more. Street Fighter now with Street Fighter 5. For me, just like it's a little bit harder to play, especially with the combos, than Mortal Kombat. But back in the day, I loved Street Fighter, and so I definitely like that more. Even though the one thing I don't like about Street Fighter before was the horrible representation of certain characters when it comes to the stereotypes of their ethnicity.
Oh boy!
Definitely gotten better with it, but it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
It's like we get a moment here. How problematic were some video games back in the day? Like, some of these were like, if you look at this today, it's like, wow. Like, how did we get away with that?
Oh my gosh. Listen, I have no idea. I have no idea, but I'm happy that it's starting to get better. I mean, there's still problems, but it's definitely better than it was before.
Which one do you feel is the best Grand Theft Auto game?
Well, okay, so what I will say is a lot of people do enjoy Grand Theft Auto 5, especially in the online play, because they're actually doing mods now for the online game, which is like really cool and entertaining. But for me, the one that I felt like was so instrumental in the entire series was San Andreas. That was the most important and instrumental title for Grand Theft Auto.
GTA San Andreas is, for so many years, the Mario games. I mean, I'm a big Mario guy. Like Super Mario, I could play Super Mario World anytime, like it's the first time I've ever seen it. GTA San Andreas, I half jokingly say this changed my whole view of video games, because that was like playing a movie. It was watching a movie. It was so real, and maybe because it was seeing, albeit somewhat stereotypical, seeing a black character be the focal point of a video game like that did something for me. It did. And it was hood, and it was wild, and it was fun. And there are days where I could follow the missions, and then there were some days when I was so stressed out from work, I'll sit there for 2 hours and just see how quickly I can get to 5 or 6 stars and just get after it. Yeah, San Andreas was a, pardon the pun, it was a game changer. It really was, in so many ways.
Yeah, it really was. And also, I felt like San Andreas, Vice City, yeah, but I really felt like San Andreas, when it came to the radio station, was very influential, especially when it comes to, kids in, suburban areas that aren't used to, old school rap or, R&B or anything like that. And it was funny because I tweeted out before. I said the Grand Theft Auto's radio station was the Spotify discovery before Spotify even was there.
I'm saying. Oh my God. Yeah, it was so great because between that game and NBA Street Volume 2, they had two of the best like hip hop playlists I'd ever seen in video games, where it's like those games straight up spoke to me between those two. And I had two stations on GTA San Andreas that I would always just have going. I would occasionally stray to the rock station just to hear what they had on there, but it was always like, just give me these two rap stations and just leave me alone. let's make this work out. Or the old school station. We got to bang this out. It was an experience. It was not just a game.
Yeah, truly was an experience.
And I guess one final question here. We could go on this all day. You're stuck on an island. You have the capabilities to play one game and one game only. What is it?
One game and one game only. Huh, that's a good question. Wow. One game, I can only play one game. What would that one game be? Wow, that's a doozy. That really is a good question, because I'm like trying to think, like, how I'm thinking is like, I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to be stuck on an island, what's a game that I could play consistently that's going to be a different experience that I will enjoy? Honestly, I probably would just do... Honestly, I would just probably do Grand Theft Auto. Because if I'm stuck on an island, I can't play online. If I could play online, it would be a different game. But, like, I think I'll probably do Grand Theft Auto because there's so much more that you can do. And I can constantly, like, do, like come up with, like, random objectives, like collect certain cars and, try to evade the cops. Just all these different things. And I felt like there's so much like creativity that can be put into it, especially if I have the capabilities to do mods. So yeah, I'll probably do like a Grand Theft Auto game.
Erin, I really appreciate this. How can people find you? How can people reach you between social media and the multitude of things you do? And of course, I know you've got a podcast. Definitely put that out there. Put that over.
Yeah, no problem. So everyone can follow me at Erin A. Simon, ERIN as in Nancy, the letter A, SIM as in mother, ON as in Nancy. That is my username for all social media platforms. And you can also find the podcast. I have my friends, Grassroots Podcast, my work at Cheddar eSports, and pretty much anything that I do, whether it's work or personal, is all going to be on my social media. So if they just check out my Twitter, Instagram, all that, they're going to be able to catch all the fun that I'm taking part in.
Erin Simon, thank you so much for coming on JSC Radio. We could have done this for 2 hours and it probably still wouldn't have gotten it all in, but thank you so much for coming on with me, and continued success to you, because you're really kicking ass out there, and I am super stoked that you came on with me.
No problem. Thank you.